Get ready, because you either die a hero or you live long enough to see me breaking down bad villains and good ones. The way this works is that first off, we'll discuss what makes a villain engaging, then we'll look at specific types of ineffective villains. For each type, I'll give you a bad example from a story, and I'll explain why it sucks. Then I'll give you a good example and explain why that one works. By the way, I'm Brandon McNulty, and I just released a new book on the craft of writing. It's called Story Made Simple, and it covers the 8 key elements of storytelling. I'll link to it in the description below so you can pick up your copy today. Now let's start by answering the question, what makes a villain engaging? I came up with 4 things. First one is that they drive the main plot. The villain's job is to create problems and force the hero to respond. This is why you often hear people say that a story is only as good as its villain. Typically, they want something, they go after it, and this shakes up the hero's everyday life. Now, keep in mind, the villain should be active throughout the story. We don't want them sitting around waiting to be defeated. They should be actively pursuing goals and creating obstacles that the hero must overcome. Second thing that makes a villain engaging, they create suffering. What separates a villain from a regular old antagonist is the immoral actions they take. If you want a true villain, they have to engage in harmful behavior. For instance, the Joker is a villain because he robs banks, blows up hospitals, and kills his own henchmen. But guys like Apollo Creed from Rocky and Lieutenant Gerard from The Fugitive are not villains. Though they oppose the protagonist, they don't do anything sinister. They're simply antagonists. Now, the great thing about villains committing immoral acts is that these actions can raise the stakes and push heroes to their limits. As the suffering gets worse, we root for the hero to stop it and often worry that they won't be able to. Third thing is a meaningful connection to the hero. This is critical. The hero-villain dynamic needs to be compelling. Not only should they fight over the same goal, but they should represent different values in the process. It's like a twisted romance where the two sides are drawn together while opposing each other. They should share common ground while also having noticeable differences in how they approach the story's theme. At minimum, the villain should fit the hero. For example, in Training Day, the protagonist Jake Hoyt learns to become a narcotics officer while working for the corrupt detective Alonzo Harris. Alonzo challenges Jake's code of honor while also forcing him to toughen up. Alonzo is a great villain for Jake, but he would not be a great villain for Donkey Kong. Alonzo doesn't fit as a Donkey Kong villain because DK doesn't care about drug trafficking in Los Angeles. Nor is his journey about moral complexity. He simply wants to eat bananas and stop the evil Void Kong from reaching the planet core. Remember that your villain needs to engage the hero on a plot level as well as a character level. Now, it might help to think of the hero and villain as 2 sides of the same coin. For example, Batman and the Joker are both highly intelligent costume outlaws, but they differ in how they control criminals, how they value human life, and how they view Gotham's future. Another example is the movie Misery. The protagonist, Paul Sheldon, is a famous author who breaks both his legs in a car accident. The villain, Annie Wilkes, is his obsessed #1 fan who tends to his injuries and holds him prisoner. Both characters have a stake in Paul's literary career, but Paul wants to write more artistic stories, while Annie wants him to continue his popular romance series. Fourth thing that makes a villain engaging is compelling motivations. I listed this one last because not every villain will necessarily have a compelling motivation. Sometimes a non-human character like the Terminator will serve as a villain, and their motivations will be simple and straightforward. But if you're writing a human villain, you should explore the why behind their actions. If they want to take over the universe, torment their spouse, or rig a sporting event, clue us in on why. The why is what deepens a character, and it never hurts to create a villain who's multidimensional. Alright, now let's get to the bad versus good. I'm going to give you 4 types of bad villains. I'll explain what each one is, then I'll give you a bad example to illustrate what I mean, and I'll explain why it sucks, and then I'll give you a good example that does the job better, and I'll explain why that one works. First type of bad villain is the fraud. This is when the main villain gets sidelined, usually for the sake of a plot twist. It undermines the villain's accomplishments, diminishes the story's dramatic impact, and it can disrupt the hero-villain dynamic. For a bad example, let's look at The Dark Knight Rises. You know the drill here. Bane is introduced as an imposing villain, one who can challenge Batman in terms of both brains and muscle. He's a former member of the League of Shadows, and his goal is to complete Ra's al Ghul's mission of destroying Gotham City. After breaking Batman's back, Bane drags our hero to an ancient underground prison and tells him that Ra's al Ghul's child was raised here with a protector who helped the child escape. Bane then takes Gotham hostage, traps the police underground, builds an army, helps Hines Ward score a touchdown, and turns a fusion reaction core into a bomb that can destroy the city. This all sets up for the final battle. Bane and Batman duel while their armies clash, and Batman wins the one-on-one fight in thrilling fashion. But that's when his old flame Miranda Tate stabs him and reveals herself to be the daughter of Ra's al Ghul. Not only that, she's also the movie's big bad, the mastermind behind everything, and it's her show now. She tells her henchman Bane to finish off Batman while she heads out to nuke the city, and before Bane can complete the deed, he gets killed off by Catwoman in a moment of comic relief. And this sucks because Bane is established as the main villain, and a dominant one at that. But unfortunately, during the final battle, he gets demoted to the role of glorified henchman. Now, I have no problem with the basic twist of Talia being evil, that's fine, but the problem is that we spend 2 hours watching Bane gain power, only for him to become her lapdog at the last minute. Had Talia been a sneaky sidekick who betrays Batman and allows Bane to continue the fight, there would be no issue here. But introducing Talia as the big bad and the mastermind behind everything, that undermines Bane's character and the story as a whole. Finally, Bane being killed off by a side character in comedic fashion only makes things worse by adding insult to injury. For a good example, I want to take a look at a movie that really went under the radar. It came out in the early 2000s, not a lot of people saw it, and even fewer people read the book that it was based on. But as you know, on this channel, I always like to shine light on hidden gems, and today we're going to look at one called Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. This one's about a wizard boy who goes to wizard school. He finds himself wrapped in this great mystery. It's very underrated stuff, but here we have the first entry in the Harry Potter series, where we learn that Harry once survived an attack from the dark wizard Voldemort. This guy murdered the boy's parents, but only left him with a small scar. And since that day, Voldemort has been missing, and the wizarding community has been afraid to even speak his name for fear that he might return. In the present day, Harry attends Hogwarts and encounters a number of unusual characters, including the oddball Professor Quirrell and the hostile Professor Snape. Later, Harry learns of a magical MacGuffin known as the Sorcerer's Stone, which can grant immortality. He and his friends become concerned that the stone could be used to resurrect Voldemort, and after witnessing several strange occurrences, Harry becomes convinced that Snape is working for the Dark Lord. Then, at the movie's climax, Harry obtains the stone and learns that it's actually Professor Quirrell who is the bad guy. Turns out Snape had been trying to protect Harry, and now Harry has to face off against Quirrell, who serves as a host for the weakened Voldemort. Voldemort offers Harry the power to resurrect his parents, but Harry refuses the offer and defeats his greatest enemy. This works because Voldemort is established as the clear-cut big bad, while we wait to find out if Snape is serving him. Then we get a twist where we learn that Professor Quirrell is actually the evil servant, and that Snape had appeared guilty because he was investigating so closely. But the surprises don't stop there, because we also learn that Quirrell had been acting as a host for his master. This enables a believable final battle where a young and inexperienced Harry defeats a weakened version of his greatest enemy. It allows for a happy ending while still promising a greater conflict down the line. Second type of bad villain is the broken logic villain. This is a villain who makes senseless plans or illogical decisions, and those plans and decisions work anyway because the plot wants them to. The story doesn't punish the villain for being stupid, and it's often the result of broken or underdeveloped motivations. And because of all this, there's a lack of meaningful conflict, lack of suffering, and a lack of value testing for the hero. For a bad example, let's look at War of the Worlds 2025. Last week I did a nice juicy review of this movie, but now I want to zero in on the villains. For context, War of the Worlds is about an alien invasion that's told through a series of video chats, news clips, and Ice Cube reactions. Cube works for Homeland Security, and he spies on everyone, including his own children. Then the aliens invade, and before long we learn they're here to gobble up our data. I'm not sure why the aliens want data, what benefits it offers them, or why they don't force people to make more data. Like, they kill people in this movie, but why? Why kill them? Don't you want us around so we can make more Facebook posts and cat videos? I mean, why hurt your food supply? Now, the aliens aren't the only stupid villains here. We also have this sicko named Donald Briggs. He's the director of Homeland Security, and years ago he fired up this surveillance program called Goliath, knowing that it would draw the aliens to Earth. Why did he do this? Well, he wanted to violate everyone's privacy because he's this control freak, just like Ice Cube. And there's actually a decent hero-villain dynamic here, but once the aliens invade, everything falls apart and Briggs hops on the crazy train. Instead of appropriately reacting to the fact that these aliens are destroying his world, he just kind of enjoys the apocalypse and pats himself on the back for causing it. There's no logic here. He's broken, the movie's broken, I'm broken. Let's move on to why this movie sucks. And it sucks because the villain's actions and motivations exist purely to keep this brain-dead plot together. Director Briggs is aggressively stupid. It's one thing to be a control freak, but don't act like everything's awesome when the world you're controlling is getting destroyed. Then you have the aliens. They want to eat data for unclear reasons, and they kill civilians who could produce more data. I understand taking down fighter jets that are trying to destroy the aliens, but why are you roasting people who could upload more things to Instagram? For a good example, let's look at Aliens. Here we have a similar collection of villains. On one hand, you have the deadly Xenomorphs. They infest a terraforming colony, then capture the colonists and use them to reproduce. Later, when the Space Marines arrive and pose a threat, the Xenomorphs fight back in order to survive. We also have a human villain in the form of Carter Burke. He's a slimy representative of the Weyland-Yutani Corporation, which wants to create weapons from the Xenomorphs. Burke is a rising star within the company, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to make a profit off the aliens. Ellen Ripley, meanwhile, is intent on eliminating the Xenomorphs. In the past, she watched one slaughter her friends, and now she teams up with Burke as he promises her they'll destroy the creatures. About midway through the movie, however, she discovers that Burke ordered the colonists to recover Xenomorph eggs for bioweapon research. Later, Burke attempts to unleash a pair of facehuggers on Ripley and a young girl in hopes of getting them pregnant so that they can smuggle the unborn life forms back home. He then tries to cover up his actions by lying and attempting murder, and finally he meets a deadly fate at the hands of the creatures he was so desperate to profit off of. This works first of all because the Xenomorphs are consistent and believable in terms of their basic motivations. This makes them a terrifying enemy, and it enables the creation of a human villain who is even worse. And Burke is an engaging villain because we hate him. The man is motivated by greed, and he will do anything to achieve his goals. Doesn't matter if it means risking lives of colonists, getting someone pregnant with an alien species, or outright murdering people. The man is a monster through and through, and his actions create deadly plot scenarios while giving the other heroes a number of challenges to overcome. And best of all, he's an excellent villain for Ripley. They both have an interest in the aliens, but for significantly different reasons, and it allows Ripley to shine. Third type of bad villain is the unconvincing villain. This is an underdeveloped villain who doesn't feel like a true threat. They may suffer from botched characterization, their choices and actions may feel forced, motivations are half-baked or unrealistic, and the hero-villain dynamic may be lacking. For a bad example, let's look at The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This is the one where 3 supervillains get crammed into the same story because the studio forgot that another Spider-Man movie made the same mistake less than a decade earlier. Now, while all 3 of the villains are undercooked in their own way, the one I want to focus on is the Green Goblin, aka Harry Osborn. Harry is not even mentioned in the first movie, and instead of introducing his character here with patience and care, the script decides to speedrun his arc from grieving son to murderous lunatic. Early on, we learn his father Norman is suffering from a rare genetic disease. Then Norman croaks in a hurry so Harry can feel bad and learn that he too will soon die of this disease, even though he's 30 years younger than his old man. But wait, there's good news. He just needs Spider-Man's blood to create a potential cure. And then there's even better news because Harry's childhood BFF happens to be Peter Parker, who happens to take pictures of Spider-Man. Don't you just love it when you're dying of a mysterious illness and your childhood best friend has easy access to the cure? I sure do. Anyway, the 2 bros hang out and talk about what great friends they are, even though their dialogue and character interactions don't indicate this. Spidey later refuses to give up his blood, fearing that it might transform Harry into another lizard man, and that forces Harry to turn elsewhere for a solution. With some help from Electro, Harry breaks into an Oscorp lab to inject himself with dangerous spider venom. This almost kills him, but somehow there's a special suit within reach that can reverse the effects of a fatal venom injection and turn him into a supervillain. At this point, the movie races to wrap up its 923 different plot lines, and after Peter and Gwen stop Electro, Harry shows up and deduces that Spider-Man and Peter Parker are the same person. Then Harry's like, "Rrrr, revenge," and he captures Gwen, takes her to a clock tower, and kills her. Peter then gives up on being Spider-Man for 5 minutes, and the movie ends with a hint that the Green Goblin will team up with Rhino in the sequel that never happened. And this sucks because Harry is underdeveloped and rushed. His storyline is one that should have taken place over the course of at least 2 films, but instead it has no time to breathe. His relationship with his father, his friendship with Peter, his struggles with the illness, his descent into villainhood, and his choice to kidnap Gwen are all hurried to the point that none of it is believable. The biggest problem, though, is the friendship, or lack thereof, between Peter and Harry. The script wants us to believe that these two have a rich history together, but their interactions are superficial, and their relationship relies on backstory to sell itself. As a result, Harry feels tacked on rather than a meaningful part of Peter's life, and since we don't buy the hero-villain connection, it's hard to accept Harry's transformation into this cackling bad guy. For a good example, let's look at Santino D'Antonio from John Wick Chapter 2. Santino is a crime boss who wants to earn a spot at the high table. To earn his spot, he needs his sister dead, and he hires John Wick to kill her. Much like Harry Osborn, Santino is not introduced in the first movie, and yet he has history with the protagonist. Santino did John a favor long ago, and now it's time to repay the debt. John initially refuses, and Santino destroys his house before forcing John out of retirement. John then goes on a mission to kill the sister, and afterwards Santino betrays John and orders a hit on him. John then hunts down Santino and locates him at the Continental Hotel, where murder is off limits. But by this point, John has been pushed to his limits, and he breaks the rules to eliminate his enemy. This works because though Santino doesn't appear in the first movie, we buy his relationship with John because of how the characters interact with each other. Santino comes to John with a request, John refuses, and Santino blows up his house as punishment. This tells us a lot about Santino as a character, tells us a lot about their relationship, and finally it tells us a lot about the lore within this story world. And though Santino doesn't get much screen time in the middle of the movie, his impact on the plot is constant. First, John has to find and kill his sister, then Santino orders John's murder, and finally John has to hunt him down. And what's interesting about Santino is that he represents the rules of the underground society. He's a great world-building character because he brings the rules to John's door, punishes him for ignoring them, and challenges John to violate the code. Finally, Santino pushes John to his limits, compelling him to make a choice that changes John's life forever. Finally, our fourth type of bad villain is Mr. Self-Destruct. This is a competent villain who crumbles due to sloppy writing. The villain initially starts off powerful and imposing, and they make good strategic decisions, but as the plot approaches its conclusion, they make brainless mistakes that allow the hero to defeat them. This wastes a potentially great villain, and it undermines the hero's accomplishments. For a bad example, let's look at Superman 2025. This movie introduces an initially great version of Lex Luthor who is portrayed as intelligent, strategic, and ruthless in getting what he wants. And the number one thing he wants is to destroy Superman. During the first half of the movie, we see Lex executing a plan where he and his henchmen rough up and manipulate Superman while trying to locate the Fortress of Solitude. There, Lex finds a recording that reveals that Superman's parents wanted him to become the next Genghis Khan and conquer the planet, and Lex uses this to destroy his reputation. Later, after kidnapping Superman's dog, Lex lures Superman into surrendering, and Lex gets what he wants about midway through the movie. He then imprisons Superman in a pocket universe, and to ensure that the guy can't escape, Lex blackmails a shapeshifter into creating kryptonite. Before Lex can kill Superman, however, he has to obtain some information from him. Lex threatens a civilian and kills him in shocking fashion. And this was the moment where I thought the movie was going to become great. But instead, from here on, it tumbles toward its conclusion. The very next thing Lex does, and remember, Lex is obsessed with Superman. The very next thing he does is leave Superman unattended for no good reason. Lex says he's going to find someone else he can torture, but instead of sending one of his countless henchmen to do it, he himself leaves, and Superman escapes shortly after. The next time we see Lex, he's having a Kylo Ren-style meltdown as he reacts to the news of the escape. Then, instead of coming up with a clever solution to recapture his enemy, he decides to destroy Metropolis in an effort to lure Superman back. Later, there's a battle between Superman and a Lex-controlled clone, and after Krypto the dog eats a bunch of Lex's flying cameras, Lex then has another meltdown. This time, he admits to his greatest enemy that he's jealous of him, and he does so in front of his most trusted subordinates. This once promising villain ends the movie by having a temper tantrum, and he gets mauled by a dog in comedic fashion before being taken away by the police. And this sucks because Lex falls apart midway through the story. He starts as a chillingly competent villain who is obsessed with eliminating Superman, and then after capturing Superman, he leaves his prize unattended for no good reason. Now, if you're obsessed with something and you get it, why would you walk away? Especially when you have dozens of people you can give orders to. And the sad part is, there's an easy fix here. At this stage of the story, Lois and Mr. Terrific are trying to rescue Superman. All you have to do is have them create a distraction that gets Lex's attention and buys Superman an opportunity to escape. But instead, what happens is Lex conveniently disappears so the plot can plot. Worse yet, after the escape, Lex spends the remainder of the story going off the rails, despite having patiently studied Superman for years. I get that this is a huge setback for Lex, but a great villain would respond by rising to the new challenge, not unraveling for the rest of the story. This ends up making Superman's accomplishments feel underwhelming, and on top of that, Lex creates no meaningful challenges or dilemmas for Superman during the final battle. In the middle of the story, during what I believe is the movie's strongest scene, Superman faces a brutal choice where he has to either sacrifice human life or valuable information, and he suffers greatly because of this. I was hoping the movie would deliver a similar dilemma later on, but instead the finale is a colorful CGI sequence where Superman just flies around and wins. For a good example, let's look at Annie Wilkes from Misery. We talked about her earlier in the video, and she's an obsessed fan/stalker who kidnaps her favorite author and forces him to write a book he hates. Much like Lex, Annie is unhinged and obsessed, but her path towards self-destruction is one that's designed in a way that makes the hero-villain dynamic compelling over the course of the story. Early on, Annie plays the role of a benevolent nurse who wants to help Paul recover. It isn't until later that Paul realizes he's trapped in her home, and he then attempts to outsmart her by sending her out of the house to obtain things he needs for his writing. Every time she leaves, he sneaks around in his wheelchair and tries to escape. But his escape methods fail, and Annie catches on, punishing him for his attempts. Along the way, she becomes more mentally unstable, and she starts making mistakes that draw a police officer to her front door. When the cop arrives, Annie hides her favorite author in the basement, but Paul finds a way to alert the cop. This leads to tragedy, and after murdering the man, Annie declares that she's going to kill both Paul and herself. But Paul buys himself more time by promising her the final part of his new novel. She takes the bait, and he launches a final attack against his obsessed fan. After building up his strength over the course of the movie, he attacks her with his typewriter, and the two enter a fierce battle to the death in which Paul wins. This works because Annie's obsession with Paul is consistent. She holds him hostage, forces him to write a book, and becomes increasingly villainous when she catches him trying to escape. There's also a strong hero-villain dynamic. Paul outsmarts her in order to attempt his escape, and both characters battle back and forth, attacking each other's weaknesses. Annie's eventual self-destruction results from isolation, mental instability, and a lack of resources. Unlike Lex, she doesn't have a team of subordinates she can rely on. She's on her own, and that means that she can't watch Paul 24/7. Finally, even after she makes critical mistakes, she continues to pose a legitimate threat, and she gives Paul the fight of his life at the end. So I hope this helps. Question of the day: who do you believe are the worst villains out there, and who are the best? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching. If you want to support the channel, please pick up a copy of any one of my books and be sure to leave reviews on Amazon. Story Made Simple is great if you're a writer. It covers the 8 key elements of storytelling, and it does so in no-nonsense fashion. Also, be sure to check out my other videos, like, share, and subscribe, maybe support me on Patreon, and as always, remember to keep on writing.